In our society today, right as of now, 1/3 of you are either going to develop cancer or already have cancer. Because the statistics now indicate that 1 in 3 will develop cancer in their life. When I first studied medicine many years ago, it was probably somewhere between 1 in 30, maybe 1 in 35 people would get cancer in their life. So something has changed over the years. And now the predictions are that in the next 2 to 5 years, that 1 out of every 2 people will have cancer. Now something isn't working. And in a land of all of the advances in science and medicine, one would think that those statistics actually would be improving. You remember that President Nixon many years ago declared a war on cancer. And we're going to wipe it out. But instead, it hasn't been wiped out, it has gotten worse. And there's a reason for that. In fact, there's a lot of reasons, but there are some very basic, important reasons that we can do something about. The reason for that problem is, one of the majors is that the food supply is a problem. That's where we normally would get the source of those. And if you study what's happened with the food, the Department of Agriculture, way back in the 30s, realized that in this country we were having a depletion of the nutrients of the soil and the food that was being grown. They did a study and said it's a problem, but for some reason, even though they made a document on it, it never was publicized very much, so not very many people heard about it. In 1966, they did a major study of the vitamin, mineral, protein, etc., the content of the plants that were being grown. In other words, the vegetables and the fruits that are being put on the market for us to eat. They found that they were extremely low in 1966. In other words, even worse than 1937. Now today, in the last 2 to 3 years, they've started a new study, and already the information coming back is that on the average, some worse than others, but on the average, our fruits and vegetables now have 50% less nutrients than they had in 1966. That means vitamins and minerals. And of course, live food is where you're going to be getting your protons and electrons. So actually, we're being starved to death as we load ourselves with pretty much worthless food. So what we're really doing is we're eating imitation food. We're getting pictures of food, a 3-dimensional picture of food made from fiber with a little bit of coloring, but there's not much else in there. And so, looking into this, we can see that there's a big problem. We can see why there's cancer, because I didn't mention, but in this third quadrant, right about in this part as you go out from the health zone, is what's called a precancer zone. As you go farther, we then get into what would be called the onset of malignancy. So the fact is that we're eating worthless food on top of a lot of other contaminants. The body does not have the ability to rid itself of this junk. We can't get rid of the pesticides and the organic chemicals and all these other things that we're being exposed to. The only thing we can do is bolster the body to be able to support itself, to take care of it on its own. And if it's missing protons and electrons, it's going to drift out here and it's going to happen. And incidentally, also thrombosis is in that zone or that quadrant, which has to do with cardiovascular. What are the 2 major causes of death and illness in this country? Cardiovascular and cancer. So I'm just saying all this to say we have a major problem, and it doesn't look to me like there's going to be any change in sight, because you understand that the growing markets are driven by large corporations whose purpose is to make lots of money. And in order to make lots of money, they artificially fertilize and do other things that produces products in deficient soil, and they pump it with nitrogen through ammonia to make it grow and look nice, but there's nothing in there. It's about like eating one of those pieces of wax fruit you see on display. There's nothing there. It might look pretty, but it's nothing there. So we get down to then, okay, we've got a problem, and how can we solve it? Produced a product, grown in an area that doesn't have all the contamination, grown in soil that has not been depleted yet of minerals, and therefore it's still loaded with nutrients. So one of the things we can do is to supplement with something that has value. And, of course, it was mentioned last night that the studies already indicate that it's very high as an antioxidant. And what does it mean when something is high as an antioxidant? It means that it's loaded with electrons. So when we eat that, we're replenishing the electron supply. And, of course, there's protons in it, too, as well as nutrients, which they mentioned last night. So we can see a tremendous reason why we might want to do something like that. Now, the question is, how long might you have to take something like, well, unless something changes, I'm afraid that we're going to have to take it the rest of our life, because I don't think the big corporations are going to much care whether you're getting too many nutrients in what they're selling or not, as long as they're making a big profit. As these numbers improved, as they increased the number of protons and electrons in the body, that the people moved back into the health zone, and that they did feel better, and that it is a tremendous prevention.